do these broadcasts and to share it out to a whole bunch of other social media things. People who were with me last night on the broadcast, we were down here in the reserve where I was running a moth survey. We spent a bit of time mainly looking for and failing to find bats, but we did at least briefly look at the moth trap, and I said I'd hop back on today and show you some of the things that we found. Not vast numbers, and I've been a bit disorganised today, so I haven't done my usual thing of taking photographs of these, so we're just going to look at them live in the containers, and the ones I don't need to retain I'm going to let out and see if we can get a picture of them sitting somewhere. Briefly talk about what they are, what we've found, but we're fairly brief broadcast today, just hop through some of the species, have a look at them, and then move on, because I've got a few other things I need to get out of the way. Anyway, we will start with this species. Let me turn the camera around. And what we've got in here is a Squarespot Rustic moth. Very common moth. Getting towards the end of the flight season for these, so this is a pretty fresh looking one. Let me see if it'll sit still out of the pot and have a better look. So you see here, Squarespot Rustic. Fairly common, well, very common moth actually. And on the wing typically until late September, early October, so a little bit late now. A little bit late, but not particularly so. That's a fairly common species. We have get them in pretty large numbers, to be honest. What else have I got? Okay, another moth. I'll look at it in the pot first of all. Rather an attractive species, but not necessarily one that's very welcome to people. This is a Boxmoth. This species is a non-native to Britain from, I believe, the Far East, and has been accidentally introduced to Britain, and the caterpillars are a major pest on box trees, so gardeners do not like this. We'll see if it will sit still when I open the pot up and have a look at it in a bit more detail. There are 3 different colour forms of this moth. This is the typical one with this dark border and a white centre, but there is a dark form which is largely purpley brown, which is a little white check where this one's got, and there is a form that's in the middle which looks a bit like this but has the trailing edge of the hind wings, of the forewings, edged with brown as well. So that's the Boxmoth. Again, a pretty common species. Put that here. The one in this pot I'm not going to let go, so we'll have to try and do our best to look through the reflections. This is one of the November moth species. There are 4 species in that genus. 3 of them you can't separate on external characteristics, and you need to look at the genitalia under a microscope. So I'm going to hang on to this one and 1 or 2 others of these so I can do that, to confirm what species they are. On this site, they are nearly always just November moth, the commonest one of them. Another specimen in here seems to be behaving, so let's take a risk of turning this one out. This moth is called the satellite. It's very much an autumn and spring species, emerging at this time of year. So that tells me that the seasons are changing. And the reason it's called the satellite is you might be able to see the orange spots on the wing here. At least in this specimen, they can be white. And they have next to them 1 or 2 small dots. You can probably see one quite clearly on this, and they are effectively the satellites, or the moons orbiting the planet of the white spots. So this moth acquired the name the satellite, and it's one of the species that we see that always tells me autumn is on the way, because satellites are now out. Continuing to go through the various things that I found. Another very autumn species, again one that emerges at this time of year, is the chestnut. And again, this is a species that comes out in autumn, largely rests during the winter as an adult, comes out again in spring, lays its eggs, and that's its life cycle. That I suppose gives it the advantage because it's laying its eggs as soon, at the start of the year. It's able to get the young and fresh growth on the vegetation. So both of those two, if I zoom out a little bit, the chestnut at the left and the satellite on the right, are species that will be typical of the time of year. Another one that's fairly typical this time of year, this one I'll put down here, is, it's going to have to sit in the pot, a green dwindled crescent. This is actually the melanistic form of it, the dark form of it. The typical form has a lot more green, but this dark form, still with these sort of really clear pale crescent marks where the wings meet, is the commoner form here in the London area. And again, this is a species that really comes out at this time of year. So again, it tells us that we're moving into autumn, if we needed telling. One more moth typical of the season in here. Oops, there we go. And this moth is referred to, is known as the brick, is its vernacular name. I'm not doing scientific names today because I'm in a rush. I just have to look them up. But this is the brick, I think because it's sort of brick coloured. And it's another of these species that is typical of autumn. Tells me it's the season. Oops, there it goes. Another rather attractive moth in here. This may well fly away, so we'll look at it in the pot first of all. This is a red-green carpet. A lot of green coloration, a bit of red in the streaks there, hence the name red-green carpet. And again, this is another of these species, that comes out in autumn and then stays out and comes out in spring to lay its eggs and so on. This is a species, the population of which has expanded hugely here in the UK, or certainly here in London. And when I first started looking at moths around here, the books about what was about said this was really quite a scarce species that I wasn't necessarily going to see. But now it's really very common, we get quite a lot of them in the traps. And it does show how species populations can shift and change. Don't think we really understand what's driven that shift in this species. Where's there? Hello, Georgia. What moth is this? This is the red-green carpet, Georgie. This is the one we were looking at last night in the trap when I was being distracted from bat searches. Few more to go. Didn't get vast numbers. This may fly away, so we'll look at it in the pot first of all. This is Diurnia lipsiella. It did actually come to light, although as the name Diurnia suggests, they do fly by day as well, this species. And this one is a male, because in this species of moths, the females have reduced wings and can't fly. It's true, there are a few groups of moths, where that happens, where the females have reduced wings. happens more, I would say certainly here, in things that are active in the winter. And that's probably to do with the relative cost of producing eggs and sperm, and that the females invest more of their time in the egg production, so they give up the ability to move and fly as much. Whereas the males, because sperm is cheaper, produce that and do keep their wings. Anyway, let's quickly see if I can get this to pose on the table. These are all species I know, so I don't really mind if they get away. No, that's flown off. I thought it would. So there's a couple more sitting there. A couple more to have a look at in here. What are these? These are two more of these November moths. This is a terribly messy pot, so you won't see it well at all. But this is a species where you need to look at its rude bits under a microscope. You need to look at the genitals under a microscope to see what species it is. So I'll not do that live. I'll not let that one go. And then one other thing I found just now, crawling about, is a caterpillar. And I'll open the pot up because it won't fly away because it's a caterpillar, which is always helpful. And quite helpfully here, you can see the arrangement of the prolegs. So it's an insect. Insects have 6 legs. That's a feature of insects. And the 6 legs are the legs at this end, just behind the head. 3 pairs there. But the caterpillars also have these fleshy protuberances that get called prolegs. Which are not, strictly speaking, 2 legs, so it doesn't really contradict that insects have 6 legs. They do. But it has these things which function as legs. Is it late cold? We'll come to that. There are species which will overwinter as caterpillars. So it's not necessarily late. You can find moths and butterflies, well, yeah, certainly moths, in every stage of their life cycle at any time of the year. And there'll be some species that spend the winter as caterpillars. This one, the structure of it tells me it is probably one of the semilupas, the Plucidae. And this dash across the head, you might just be able to see down on the head there, some black lines running along it. Suggests to me this is silver Y. Silver Y is a very common migrant moth, but typically is not thought to survive here in the United Kingdom. It's typically thought that this species, although it arrives in large numbers of migrants, it can't cope with our winters. So although you can get caterpillars any time of year, it is probably quite late for this one here in Britain. This one would probably not make it through the winter on its own, although I like to rear caterpillars on to just, well, partly to check I have identified it correctly, partly to see if anything interesting happens. So I will probably keep this one and rear it on. I'll keep it somewhere a little bit warmer. So this one will get a reprieve and make it through the cold British winter. So that was basically all the species we had. That's all the species we caught last night. It wasn't a huge number, but there were a few things. We'll end. Let's end back on the red-green carpet because it's funky. And there's my field guide that tells me what I'm looking at. But we'll end on this red-green carpet. A fairly brief report today with me not having done a lot of checking and details and research because I've been rather swamped with other things. But we'll end there with that red-green carpet, and I'll probably hop back on maybe later in the week if there's something interesting to report. So thanks.